Death is the final certainty of life. But for some, it is not a swift end. It is a journey, an ordeal meticulously designed to last as long as possible. A masterpiece of cruelty that turns the human body into a stage for horror. We have all heard of executions. Hanging, beheading, firing squads. Swift ends, almost merciful in comparison. But what happens when the goal is not to kill, but to destroy? When death is not the punishment, but the final release from an agony lasting days? Welcome to Dark Chronicles. Today we are not exploring a single crime, but the pinnacle of human punishment. We will travel from ancient Persia to medieval Europe to uncover the slowest and most brutal methods of execution ever conceived. And we will focus on one specific case, an execution that, according to historical accounts, lasted 3 days. 3 days of conscious agony. 3 days in which a man became a living monument to suffering. This video contains graphic descriptions of historical violence. It is not for the faint of heart. If you are ready to face the darkest truths of human nature, write "I am ready" in the comments. This is a journey we will take together, but only if you are truly prepared. Now let us enter the theater of cruelty. To understand how an execution could last 3 days, we must first understand the mentality that created it. For our ancestors, punishment was not only a matter of justice, but of spectacle. A public execution was a social event, a warning, a form of macabre entertainment. And the longer and more painful the execution, the more powerful the message. Our main case takes us to 14th century Germany. A man, convicted of murder, was sentenced to the wheel, but not a simple execution. The judge, in his verdict, specified that death was not to be swift. It was to be an example. The method, known as the breaking wheel or Catherine wheel, was a masterpiece of pain engineering. The condemned was tied to the ground, limbs stretched out, and placed on wooden blocks. The executioner, armed with a heavy iron-rimmed wagon wheel, began his work. The first blow was not aimed at the head or the heart. That would have been an act of mercy. No, the first blow was aimed at the shins, then the knees, then the thighs, then the forearms, the elbows, the arms. Each blow, a bone shattered. The sound, a symphony of cracks and screams rising above the crowd. We are only scratching the surface of human ingenuity and cruelty. If you are fascinated by criminal history and the psychology behind the most extreme punishments, subscribe to Dark Chronicles and hit the bell icon. Every video is a deep dive into a world history tried to forget. By the end of the first day, the body of the condemned was a heap of broken limbs, a sack of flesh and shattered bones. But he was still alive, conscious, his nerves, a screaming choir of pain. And here began the second phase, the cruelest of all. His body, now as pliable as that of a rag doll, was woven between the spokes of the very wheel that had broken him. The broken limbs were bent and tied, transforming the human body into a grotesque sculpture of suffering. The wheel was then hoisted onto a tall pole, exposing the condemned to the sun, the wind, the rain, and to the birds. This was his state at the end of the first day, still alive, still conscious. The crowd dispersed, only to return the next day to witness his condition. At night, he was left alone with his pain and the company of crows. On the second day, dehydration and shock began to take their toll. Fever rose, his tongue swelled. But historical accounts say that in some cases, small amounts of water were given, not out of mercy, but to prolong the agony, to ensure the spectacle continued. What drove thousands of people to watch such a show? Was it pure sadism? Or was there something deeper? A sort of social catharsis, a way to exercise one's fears by witnessing the worst that could happen to a human being? Tell me your theory in the comments. It is a question that haunts us even today. But the wheel was not the only method designed for a slow death. If we travel back in time to ancient Persia, we find a method perhaps even more terrifying in its psychological conception: scaphism. Imagine being placed naked inside 2 boats, one on top of the other, with only your head, hands, and feet sticking out. You are forced to consume milk and honey until you develop uncontrollable diarrhea. Your body is then smeared with more milk and honey. The boats are left in a stagnant swamp under the scorching sun. What happens next? Your very body becomes a feast. Insects, attracted by the sweetness and filth, begin to devour you. Alive. Flies lay eggs in your flesh. Maggots hatch and start feeding from within. Death does not come for days, sometimes weeks. It comes from septic shock, dehydration, gangrene. A death in which you are literally consumed alive by nature. This was not just physical pain, it was an assault on the soul. The sensation of being eaten, the loss of all human dignity. It is perhaps the pinnacle of psychological torture. These stories are not easily found in textbooks. They require digging into ancient sources, travelogues, forgotten legal documents. If you want us to keep bringing these extreme stories to light, consider supporting Dark Chronicles through the Patreon link in the description. Every contribution is a torch that helps us illuminate the darkest corners of the past. Let us return to our condemned man on the wheel. The third day. The sun rises on a figure that is barely human. His body is a blackened, swollen mass, covered with birds pecking at his flesh. Yet according to the accounts, his eyes are still open. There is still a glimmer of consciousness. One last flickering spark of life in a hell of pain. Death, when it finally comes, is not an event. It is a process. A slow fading away. Perhaps by a heart attack from extreme stress. Perhaps by internal bleeding. Or perhaps simply because the body has nothing left to give. Historical records mention a case of a 14th century murderer who remained conscious for 3 days. 3 days. 72 hours of unrelenting agony. And after death, the humiliation did not end. The body was left on the wheel to decompose publicly as a warning. According to the beliefs of the time, this prevented the soul from finding peace, denying it a proper burial and condemning it to wander forever. Punishment extended beyond life into death itself. This is not just a horror story, it is a lesson about the history of justice and the human capacity to inflict suffering. If you believe this lesson is important, share this video. Help us ensure these stories are not forgotten. Why? Why create such elaborate and cruel methods? The answer is complex. In an age without maximum security prisons, execution was the only guarantee that a criminal would never harm again. But there was more. Terror as deterrence. These executions were the most extreme form of state propaganda. They said, "This is what happens to those who defy power." The message had to be so terrifying that it burned into the mind of anyone who witnessed it. Retributive justice. The idea of an eye for an eye was taken to the extreme. The suffering inflicted on the criminal had to far exceed that inflicted on the victim. It was a ritualized, public form of revenge. The spectacle of power. To execute a man in such a spectacular way was a demonstration of absolute power. The ruler or the state could not only take life, but control every single agonizing moment of it. Today we look at these methods with horror. We call them cruel and inhuman. But they are a fundamental part of our history. They show us where we come from and remind us how fragile our concept of civilization is. They remind us that the line between justice and vengeance is often as thin as the edge of an executioner's blade. After hearing all this, the question is inevitable. Is our society truly less cruel? Or have we simply hidden our cruelty behind prison walls and the sterile procedures of lethal injections? Have we eliminated cruelty or merely made it invisible? Leave your thoughtful opinion in the comments. This community is the right place for such an important debate. The history of executions is the history of our struggle with our own demons. It is a dark mirror reflecting our capacity to rationalize the unimaginable. And it teaches us that the true measure of a civilization is not found in how it treats its best citizens, but in how it treats its worst. Thank you for having the courage to stare into the abyss with us. Our next investigation will take us to why you wouldn't last 5 minutes in a medieval brothel. Click here to continue your journey into the darkness. And if you haven't yet, subscribe and become a guardian of these lost stories. Your curiosity is the light that allows us not to fear the dark. We'll see you again in the Dark Chronicles.